how does Ndi go from this quiet, confident woman to owning a law firm?
I was extremely motivated by the fact that she didn't shy away. She still went on ahead despite people actually laughing in her face.
What is something that people don't know about Ndi?
So when I went out, it was mostly, that was my big motivation thing.
I do say everybody should study law. I think it should be made as a basic requirement before you go to the next chapter of your career.
I mean, I guess it depends. So justice is highly connected to law, but whether it's equal to equality, the answer is no. And I think you can still be a professional lawyer, but with some compassion. There's no reason why you can't deliver legal service without compassion.
Outside all those accolades, because you've achieved so much to be able to even own your own law firm. Welcome to Freedom Fire Podcasts. I'm quite excited to be having a chat this morning where it's nice, early and bright in New South Wales. Right, Ndi Ruppert, welcome to Freedom Fire Podcasts. I'm quite excited to be having a chat this morning where it's nice, early and bright in New South Wales.
Yes, thank you for having me, Anastasia.
I am excited, as we were just talking about. I'll start by saying that you're the principal solicitor and founder of Ruppert legal firm, and your specialty is migration law.
Yes.
You have been featured in some of really wave-making whatever here in Australia, like the Herald, and you've also been named as for 3 years in a row through Doyle's Guide as a leading migration here in New South Wales. Outside all those accolades, because you've achieved so much to be able to even own your own law firm, leave alone all that, what is something that people don't know about Ndi?
That I have a passion, I guess, for some creativity too. So that's my outlet. I sew little kid clothes.
Right.
And I like making little things at home. So actually, as a side thing, we have a very background business called Jizam, which is a clothing business, but it centers around African textures and materials. And I'd just like to play around with creating little new designs. Initially, I was doing it for myself, just little patchwork on some of my own clothes, just to add some creativity. And then I moved into doing it for my husband because it was the next experiment, and then my kids when they came along, and I find that I really enjoy the kid ones. So I guess it's not a site that I externally advertise much, but before deciding to be a lawyer, I actually always thought I'd be a fashion designer like my mom. It was a quick switch in my final term of my final year in high school.
So what made you change?
Well, I watched Legally Blonde. Very
Right.
typical. And so I was in high school, in a boarding school at the time, and one of my friends and I were watching, we had movie night then, and we watched Legally Blonde, and we were just, yes, it's a rom-com and it's a funny comedy movie, but we were inspired by the messaging under that about a female who was looked down on, who actually made a difference within the legal space where no one else thought that they could. And we looked at each other and we said, we're studying law. And we both ended up studying law. I came to Australia and she went to the UK. We're both lawyers now. So we both stuck to it, I suppose.
Right. So what was it in looking at the woman? What was it? Is that the way you were raised? Is that because it was innately in you? What is it about a woman being looked down upon you that made you think, no, I've got to make this right?
Yeah, so I was raised to know no boundaries. I was lucky enough to have very supportive parents who said, sky's the limit. I still remember this phrase all the time because my mom would always say that. She's like, all those rooms you can be in, it doesn't need to be, there's no difference between a male dominated or anything. You can go into any room you want. And so I think watching that movie and just seeing that, oh, the legal space, I guess it just brought perspective that in the legal space, um, there's sometimes potentially. So this lady was, I guess, some background, a blonde young female, and I guess everyone knows the connotations of, oh, she's blonde and where the saying comes from. So it
Yeah.
was touching on the fact that that's what happened, and she was in a relationship with someone who, a male who they showed as being very serious, and he was studying law, and she didn't want to be away from her boyfriend, so enrolled in law school. And everyone was just laughing at her, saying it was no place for her. She was clearly only there for her boyfriend, who also looked down on her. No one believed in her. And then she decided to represent another female, I guess, who was kind of being taken advantage of. I guess it was, whilst it was a comedy, now that I'm talking about it more and looking back on it, there were some undertones in there, I think, around just the unfairness of the system between male, female in general.
Yeah.
And so I think it touched on, I've got a very strong sense of justice. And
Mm.
also that combined with equality. I know that just one of them doesn't really achieve the other. So I like to combine them. And because of seeing all the undertones within that, I just felt I just thought it was an unfair system, and I don't like unfairness. But
Yeah.
then I was extremely motivated by the fact that she didn't shy away. She still went on ahead, despite people actually laughing in her face. She still went on, and it was a nice touch that in the end, the case that she'd taken up, she won on a very specific issue, which um, centered around knowing, I guess, stuff about hair. So in the end, it's still tied into her knowledge and her interests around beauty. But she was able to still apply that in the legal setting and get a positive outcome that, for example, someone who's perceived as being a high intellect and therefore doesn't waste their time on all these beautician things, they would have never really picked up on that particular nuance. So I liked
Yeah.
how they tied in that. I guess it could be anyone from any direction, any perspective. They have something to contribute to any scenario, and anyone given the opportunity can actually grow into a particular space and excel at that. And so it,
Amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing to hear that. Um, have you found it to be any different in law as you're now practicing it?
Um, so I remember the first day of my what my first lecture. The
Mm.
lecturer actually said, "If any of you watch Legally Blonde and you think you can be lawyers, I suggest you walk out right now." And he
Right.
looked at the door, and I felt seen. I didn't say anything, and I quietly sat in the back in my seat. I didn't stand up, and I looked around to see if anyone else was fidgety, but I couldn't tell. I certainly was. I don't know if other people could tell, but I stuck it out anyway because I guess deep down, without knowing, there was a strong sense of I need to see this through as well because just to cross those boundaries. And so I studied and I worked in, I've also been drawn to helping roles.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a family. My mom was the president of the Lions Club in Zambia, in the area that we grew up in. We
Mm.
worked in a lot of charity organizations. So I was drawn to that sort of work. And when I completed my studies, I worked for an organization that advocated again for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my clients were people with disabilities, and it was representing them around discrimination or anything really in all sorts of settings. And when the National Disability Insurance Scheme came along, I then helped with the appeals process within that and helping shape that system. And at that stage, I found that I really liked being involved in the development stage of a new thing. Like
Yeah.
you can really play on how it will come into effect eventually and develop it the right way. So that was my path, and eventually moved into immigration. But with regards to your question, um, I guess there have been things to jump over, and there have been moments where I've thought some of the difficulties I've experienced, um, or not difficulties per se, potentially maybe just challenges, they do are centered around a few things.
Mm,
Some of them are, yes, gender based, some of them are location based. So, my background, where I'm from, all those sorts of things, just in terms of linking in to certain areas.
mm,
But I guess my mom's voice still in the back of my head, sky's the limit and you can do whatever. They're still very supportive, my parents, and very involved still in my life. And so having a good support system, I guess, has helped me um, grow into ways that I would have always liked to, because I do like to be pushed and I do like to cross those boundaries. But I don't know that I would have been able to do it without a really strong support system. And right now, that also centers around my husband, particularly around the creation of this practice.
lovely, lovely. You talked about support system, and I want to hone in first of all, as a mother now. How are you going to raise your children knowing what you know and knowing that your supporting system then supported you, your parents supported you to live your dreams? What is it that you're going to do with your children? And what is it that you're going to do differently from the way you were raised?
Um, so my husband and I have had some conversations. So we've had different upbringings. We're from different backgrounds. He's German, and we've decided, so he's German. I'm Zambian. We're in Australia, all now Australian, and we've decided to look at that positively in the sense that we've had the exposure to three different cultures. We've got the
Mm,
benefit of picking the things that we felt really worked and were drawn to out of all those three cultures, and molding them into something that we would then like for our kids. So, with regards to how I would raise them, I would absolutely still build on the fact that they can do anything. Sky is the limit, that they shouldn't feel limited, that there's no place for them to be judged based on whether it's appearance, or what background or association they may be perceived to have. All that is irrelevant. And I guess
mm,
also just a focus point on, if you want to do something, you can work hard to make sure that you do achieve that. But also, if you do something, you need to bring your full self and do it properly. Otherwise, there's really no point in doing something if you're not going to do it the right way. And I've found within my own experience, I guess, that if you are genuine and you bring your best,
mm,
it does work out. It might not be immediately, but it does work out. So there needs to be a sense of strong integrity there as well. So I guess, in terms of merging cultures, I really like the way I was raised with regards to respecting other people. I think respect is a really, really important aspect.
mm,
Also, just the exposure of virtues of empathy, kindness, all those human virtues. In Zambia, they're really big on hospitality and caring for other people. It's always the next person. You're constantly thinking of the next person. And I think it has pros and cons. The pros are definitely that you are a compassionate empath, but being
mm,
an empath can also it's difficult because you're taking on feelings of all those around you, and it can be quite draining and tiring, and emotionally. And also, it's easy to find yourself in situations where you're potentially being taken advantage of. That's my worry for my kids as well. So on one
mm,
hand, I really want to build on those characteristics, because I think it is um, important for them to have that human aspect, as it makes you able to relate to people from all sorts of different backgrounds. On the other hand, I do like the German side of just directness in the sense of just say what you mean
Yeah.
and be clear about that. I think that's one aspect that wasn't really strong in Zambia because people don't want to hurt someone else's feelings. But I feel like there could be a middle ground where you can still say exactly what you mean and be clear about it so that there's no confusion, but in a respectful way. And so
Yeah.
that's something that we're trying to build within our kids is to be able to be vocal enough and stand up to things that are not good in their view or that they don't support, but still in a respectful way. It doesn't need to be rude, it doesn't need to be offensive. You can still say your piece and remove yourself from a certain situation and still maintain just a positive or at least neutral level there. And then also, I guess, on the Australian side, just I guess not everything has to be a big deal and the little bit of a laid back kind of attitude and combining all those three, I feel like will set you up in a pretty good space that you will be able to be okay in whatever situation you're in, whatever area you're in each part of the world, and relate to different people who've come from different journeys.
Australia suffers sometimes on from tall puppy syndrome. I hear people talk about it all the time. What has been your experience in your journey with that in Australia? Have you found that you're having to shrink in places, or are you aware of it and you just show up unapologetically? How do you have you navigated that?
When I first arrived in uni, I struggled a little bit.
Mm,
I guess it was also just coming from a culture that is also it also promotes you don't sell yourself, other people pull you up. And so you just quietly sit in the background and do what you need to do, and someone else will be the one to pull you up if they need to. And I found actually that in class, it just meant that I really wasn't saying anything because I
mm,
wasn't being called up on to express my views. And also, the other aspect of the culture is talking over someone is rude. And so, the aspect of just like open discussion and you chiming in kind of before someone's finished their sentence just so you can get your go, it just, I really struggled with that as well. If it
yeah.
was kind of like a structured, okay, now it's your turn to say something, I could find something to say and I could say something. But honestly, just throwing it out there was a thing I really struggled with. And then in that aspect, it also started to affect my grades a little bit in the sense of not the written tasks. So those
Mm,
were always okay because it was in my space. But then there's always an element within your assessments of what did they used to call it? I think something along the lines of class participation or
yeah.
something. That was
Mm,
always like nearing zero, to be honest, because there was just really no opportunity until one lecturer asked me because she was like, I know you know this because you wrote it in your thing. And I was like, yes, and I'm quite happy to speak about it now that you've called me up on it. And I spoke about it in the classroom. And after that, she asked me, she's like, so why don't you talk more in the class? And I said, it's something I'm working through, but culturally, I have not been raised to talk over other people. And I have um, essentially, like, I'm also not raised to sell myself. I'm just like, so it was just an ingrained thing that I really struggled with. I mean, let alone calling my lecturers by their first name. That in itself was a hurdle I needed to jump as well. So a few things I was working through in those first years. And honestly, I can't say that by the time I graduated, I'd already found my voice. Not really. Even in my first place of work was similar
mm,
until we had a few years working in, there was an opening when my own supervisor was going on some extended leave and they wanted to fill that position. And initially, the people in the organization an external, they'd had someone external who then suggested, oh, how about we consider D? And then people were like, I don't know if she'd want to do it because I guess I was quiet. And so then the applications came up and I applied. And the question they did ask me in the interview was, you tend to be quiet. How are you going to manage the supervision aspect of this role? And I just said, being quiet doesn't necessarily mean that I can't do it. The
Mm.
reasons I are quiet are A, B, C, D. And I kind of laid it out. And so I said, from my perspective, it's that battle between trying to be respectful and giving other people space and not trying to be rude. So it's a juggle that I do internally, just based on my own experience and how I've grown up. But actually, in a supervision role, where I would kind of create that space, I feel like I could then create a language or communication path that I would be able to actually have those one on ones with my staff. And also in meetings, if I'm the one handling them, I'm quite okay with that. And so they were like, okay, we'll give it a try. And they did. And from that, I remember the CEO calling me into his office and he was like, I'm so proud of you because I literally started with him straight after my uni. And so I guess he grew this fatherly kind of, we had this relationship. I guess he'd seen me grow in his words. So he was just like, I would have never guess, but it was really good when you answered that question because it gave me an understanding because you're obviously capable. You were just quiet, and then and so I started to obviously, I then got the gist that people then think being quiet connects to either not being knowledgeable or not being capable, which I still stand by that is not actually true. But it's just how it comes out. And I feel like, again, it's just different perspectives and environments. So out of that, I've been training myself to be a lot more conscious as well, I guess, is how I'm coming across
Yeah.
as opposed to just the battle that's within me. And so I've had to step out of my comfort zone a few times, particularly around all these external talks, but it's getting more comfortable. But I now know like I'm actively just wearing a different hat so that people can relate better because now I know and I understand how I come across in certain instances, and that's not what I'm trying to perceive. So if it's a thing I'm battling inside, I now know how to address whichever way, depending on what environment I'm in and who I'm working with.
And it's such a juggling dance because we hear leaders speak last. And then there's this nuance of also just being out there, and we should look at it as confidence. It doesn't always mean like that. I'm on the other spectrum. When I'm in an environment I'm very comfortable with, you can't stop me from talking. Everybody in my family thought I'd actually be a lawyer because then they'll tell at least a judge can shut you up. And I'm very vocal about things I'm very passionate about. But as a leader, now to the opposite of you, what I've learned to do is to give people space, is to be quiet and wait for everybody to speak so I can learn where they're at and what they are thinking and then come in. And so it's interesting because life is a dance. It's not one way or the other.
Exactly.
Quite interesting there. Now, how does they go from this quiet, confident woman to owning a law firm?
Uh, I am still quiet. I believe part of me is sometimes like I guess similar to you. I speak when I need to speak or feel like it's important to speak. Absolutely. And I guess whilst I was still quiet natured, I still had big dreams. I still always wanted to help. And actually, when I started this immigration practice, one of my primary school friends, who I'm still really close friends with, she's in Zambia, they're twins. She said to me, I can't believe you did it. You always used to say you wanted to have your own law firm. And I actually didn't even like, I
Remember?
remember any of that. So it was funny that someone from my childhood actually brought that full circle in. So I guess it's when I went into the immigration space, I found that it's a passion area for me for personal reasons as well, but it's also
Mm,
an area where you definitely are helping people. The impact that you see on people, it's huge. I think, and also I've been through the process myself, and I know some things that it seems straightforward from the outside are stressful because you're in limbo quite a number of times, particularly when you're waiting for grants and anything can happen and changes here and, all those sorts of things. And also being at the uni, I had a lot of international friends and their journeys have all spanned out quite differently and all centered around immigration. So when I worked in this space, I found that I really, really enjoyed it. I also worked for an organization that this wasn't their primary focus. They were trying to establish this practice, but it was more passion space as well for the partner in charge at the time. And so the systems were a little bit different, I guess. And so I had all these big ideas that I wanted to test out and see, okay, can we be more efficient if we do this? And but it meant investing in specific software, investing in certain systems, and it being so small and compared to the other primary focus of the business. Within that space, there really wasn't a good business argument, I guess, for all the investments that I would have hoped for, which is completely understandable. If it's not your primary focus, you're also not pulling
mm,
resources and funds from your primary focus to build this thing that you're not even sure is going to work. So completely understood that, but I still had the fire within me and I just wanted to see. So when I went out, it was mostly that was my big motivation thing. I, I guess I needed the closure. I needed to see whether the ideas that I had could actually improve a system. I'm very system oriented and I love finding efficiencies within that, problem solving, all those things. So I yeah, when I went out on my own, I decided, okay, let me see. And it circles back to my previous statement about if you're going to do something, then you need to do it properly. And I just wanted to give it my full thing to see whether I could make a change, I guess, in how the service is provided. And in again, circling back to my sense of justice and equality, I always wanted to be able to offer a dignified service, a professional, high level service to all my clients, regardless of their background.
mm,
So part of my give back within my practice is we offer a small pro bono service, self-funded, and it's targeting people who've experienced domestic family violence and associated to their migration space. So the way the immigration system set up in Australia, particularly sponsored visas, and that could be family sponsored ones as well
mm,
as employer sponsored ones, there is a power imbalance in that. And because you're dealing with relationships and humans, sometimes
mm,
things don't work out, and that power imbalance can sometimes switch and leave an opening for a level of abuse. And so, out of that, you also find, particularly, I mean, it could be in any setting, honestly. I've dealt with clients in any of those relationships that I just mentioned.
mm,
But in particular, you also find that within the partner visa space, because that's
mm,
sort of more an emotional kind of space, the level of violence sometimes can be quite extreme. And then you find that people are sticking in those unsafe environments, even when there's kids involved, for example, because they think there's no other option. And it's for the benefit of their children to have to be here to, be educated in Australia and have a future here or something. So then they're risking all that. And that's actually an area which, because the Department of Home Affairs is now focused on domestic violence, and they're really trying to cull that. So they've brought in some initiatives, really helpful initiatives that provide pathways for people in those situations, that they don't have to stay there. But the other side of that domestic family violence is that part of the abuse can also be financial abuse. So someone might not have the funds to access the correct legal services to help them get out of that situation, or even just access anyone really, to let them know that actually you have options. So that's where I thought I'd focus my target on. And also, just domestic violence is another passion space for me. I think it comes down to, again, the level of power imbalance and unfairness, and someone taking advantage of someone else, you know. And so we offer that limited pro bono service. And for me, I guess an important part of this practice was to be able to give the level of service that I would give a corporate client or another paying client to someone who has experienced this violence and who's a pro bono client. I don't want them to feel it's a charity. I don't want them to feel we're doing them a favor. I want them to have the dignified service and know that they're being treated like a client. All our processes, all our systems that we do for all the paying clients, we do for them. And which is why it's also limited, because, just financially the resources, they're limited. But it's doing that, I guess, fulfills my own helping aspect, especially growing up in a space where always been in a helpful kind of space. And so yeah, I've been able to create, I guess, a space. And I guess based on my background and my work, I've worked both in the community sector and the private sector, and brought out, again, same thing, the things that I really liked about both those sides. In the community sector, they really have that compassion level. And I think you can still be a professional lawyer, but with some compassion. There's no reason why you can't deliver a legal service without empathy and compassion.
That
I don't
that
think
is so
the
true. That is so true. I told you I did a master's in law. The one thing I realized, and I don't know if this is your take. Actually, let me ask it as a question: is justice equal to law?
um, I mean, I guess it depends. So justice is highly connected to law, but whether it's equal to equality, the answer is no. So they're not the same. So there's an image I actually really like that goes around social media where it differentiates between justice and equality. And essentially, equality is, they're saying there's three people, one's in a wheelchair, one's a small child, and one's an adult. There's a fence in front of them, and they all want to watch a soccer game over the fence. They each are given a block that's a certain height, and they can each use that to be able to access or to be able to see over the fence. Now, the adult can already stand by the fence and see over it, but they use the block anyway, so they can see better. And now they've got like shoulder height above. The child's block doesn't really do much because their head just goes up to the fence now. And the person in the wheelchair, well, what are they going to do with the block? But that's equality. You give everyone the exact same thing, and that's what it is. Justice, on the other hand, would be you provide a ramp for the person with a wheelchair, a ramp to somewhere higher. That's what they can use, and that's what helps them see over the fence. The child needs two blocks, and the adult doesn't need any block at all. That's justice. Justice, they all still are able to watch the soccer game, but they all don't have to be given the exact same thing to be able to see that. So I really like that image because in pictures, it really just clarifies exactly what I also have in my head about the difference between justice and equality. And when you look at the law, I guess it's inflexible. The rules are the rules. And so you can come to it and you can read them as they are. And if you fit in, well and good. If you don't, too bad, too sad. Like that's just what what it is and what the system is. And so a little bit of a struggle. And I guess in terms of practice, is partly why I do like the immigration space. Like, yes, they have multiple rules, but because they know they're dealing with humans, there's so many different layers. You know, you have the Migration Act, you have the regulations, you have the legislative instruments, which allow the government to make quick changes to adjust to the what's happening essentially, because changing the act is a whole process. So at least they've put in all those things. And then they have the procedure advice manuals, which is essentially just policy that the Department of Home Affairs, how they apply the law. So it can always be argued in a court of law because it's not law, but it at least gives you an idea of how the department is going to address a case, for example, and puts you in the mindset of the case officer a little bit better so you can prepare your clients a little bit better and have a plan future. But at the very end of it, albeit it being a very, very long process and also quite daunting for the clients that go through it, they also have the discretionary ministerial level where it then comes down to the minister to assess whether or not there's compelling and compassionate reasons for a particular person in a particular situation who might not have fit the line. So has some roots, and I guess more importantly, I just like the fact that you can try to avoid all that if you do it right the first time at application stage. So actually, our policies to avoid, unless we have to, because we've got a plan now and we just know that we're targeting whether it's a ministerial thing because it's a particular case which needs that special attention. But otherwise, is to try and get it right at the application stage to avoid jumping into that flexible system. Because even at the AAT, at least it's a review system, and the ART now they can look at the facts and reassess the decision. Whereas at the federal level, it's literally just if there's a point of error of law. So if there's new facts that ultimately change the scope, and if this person applied based on those new facts, it's irrelevant at that stage. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
what were your experience? You just said before.
Yeah, it was shocking and surprising for me because all along I think why everybody thought I'd be a lawyer is because I'm very passionate about humanity, about justice, about what is right, about just treating people right, not equal. And I'm glad you did bring that definition, but right, meeting me where I am at. Strongly passionate about children because I believe that they don't make an application to be here, and we have a responsibility as a society to look after them. So when I went into it, I my head was in one space, and then I realized actually this is rule. It's either is or it's not.
Yep.
And the rest you have to figure out a way of how you argue it and all this. So it was quite compassionate. And I have a goddaughter now who's really wanting to study law. And I said, be very careful that you're not getting into it because you're trying to find what is just. You have to really be really aware. I do say everybody should study law. I think it should be made as a basic requirement before you go to the next chapter of your career, because there's a lot of things that we take for granted, and you get into a contract and you don't read the fine lines and all those nuances. I think it would be really great. So I'm glad to hear experiences are the same. The more I'm talking to you, the more I'm like, oh, it's not just we have kids who are the same age. We
Yeah.
do share passion, and I can
Yes.
see how passionate you are. And I want to plug in, you talked about pro bono for domestic violent women. If people are in New South Wales and they are looking for a service, where do they find you?
We're on Google. So if you Google Rupert Legal, we usually come up. Also, our website is rupertlegal.com.au. And we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. Yeah, I think those are our socials. So if you start with the Google, it usually pops up and you'll be able to find us.
and that for pro bono, but also if you are in New South Wales, in Australia, looking for a migration lawyer, I think we found the person, because if we can support each other to get you to the place that your business is thriving, to be able then to help the people that are in our community, or people that we can relate to who are going through these things through domestic violence, because it is true. Australia is notorious. It is notorious from a domestic violence perspective. But when you have the nuances of even being a migrant, or where now you can't come out because if I do, this person is my breadwinner and my children are on the line. And culturally, we've also been cultured. You don't air your
Yeah.
dirty linen in
Yeah.
dirty laundry in public. All these things, there's so many nuances. So if we can support each other for the business to thrive, and so you're able to help the ones that really need help. Once again, Rupert Legal, get to look at that, and contact D for your migration questions or migration support. Um, when I was researching about you, I came about something very interesting, that one of the greatest fears in humankind is public speaking. One of the greatest fear. People fear public speaking more than they fear death.
Yeah.
That research is crazy.
Yeah.
And you recently overcame that fear, and you did really well. Talk to us about the process of all that, and how are you feeling now that you did public speaking?
Good. Yeah. I guess I felt a sense of achievement. After that, I needed to go into my shell. So I went home after the event. I had to change into jeans and a t-shirt just to like down, came into my office, put on my headphones and focus music. And I did what I'm comfortable at doing. And I did some client work. So in a space that's like, stuff that I know I'm good at and stuff that I know I can do. And that's what I focused on for the afternoon just to refill my cup. But before that, I guess I was approached by the University of Newcastle because they saw me talk on a panel, and they then thought that I'd be a good MC for introducing the international students to Newcastle for TAFE and also for the uni, noting that I was an international student myself. And they collaborated with City of Newcastle, Study New South Wales, so government organisations as well were involved. TAFE was there, and the uni, of course, was there. They had accounted for around 300 people, which was a little item that they mentioned, just kind of, oh yeah, so maybe just expecting around 300 or so people. And I was like, what? So I said, okay, it's fine. I'll just take it on. It's just I just get really nervous if I'm talking about my work, for example. Sometimes I get lost in it. It's a passion space, and I've got all the information, and I know what I feel and what I know about it. But just the thought of standing up and all these people listening, and it it just makes me a little bit nervous, I suppose. And so on that day, I woke up early, did my breathing, and I was very grateful that it was in the morning, same as this, because it was just something I could just do, get it out of the way in the day rather than have the whole day thinking about this thing. It did mean that my night wasn't great before that because of the anxiety that I had, but it was fine. Woke up, and it was funny. It was actually the day, and one of the reasons I did agree was the day the event was happening was my birthday. And so I thought, as a gift to myself, I will overcome this challenge. I'll just, like that's what I'll do. I like experiences as ways to celebrate my birthday, and this just so happened to fall on the day, so I was going to take it on. And so I did it. And when I got there and I looked at the room before everyone walked in, just to get familiar, I thought, this is huge. But then the other positive thing was it was dark where everyone was sitting, and there was so much lighting coming into my eyes on the stage that I really couldn't see very much. So in the end, I just couldn't see all the faces because I'm also very personable and like to read people's faces and their reactions and all the things. And that kind of, I guess, would distract me a little bit if someone in the middle of my talk then picked up their phone or like appears bored or uninterested. And so I didn't see any of that. And I was lucky enough to have some people that were very supportive again and said, "Oh, do you want to run through?" And I did, and got some tips, I guess, around that. But the comment that I was given that stuck with me is that there was a point when I was rehearsing that I started to talk about my own journey, and I got lost in it because I was reflecting and I was back in the moment and I was using my hand gestures, and he was like, "That's where you need to focus. That's the you and the talking." And then even the people that invited me to do the talk said that was what they saw. So it's those moments where I'm so engrossed in what I'm saying that I forget that I'm nervous and I'm doing all the hand movements and I appear even more confident. And so that's what everyone wanted. And that kind of stuck with me then. So I just um, looked at the thing and just kind of jumped in. And I just put myself 20 years ago when I came in the shoes of all the attendees there. And I was like, I've lived this. I know it. It's fine. There was a little bit of imposter syndrome, I think, trying to slip in. But then I was like, I have been there. So I'm not speaking out of something I don't know. I actually know or could at least understand some of their experiences and their feelings that they're having at the moment. And so I just kind of focused and delved on that. And yeah, before I knew it, it was actually, it started and I was in it and it was just happening. So the nerves then stopped because it's all the anxiety before. And I remember saying this to my son who was having a presentation day at school where he was very nervous. And I said, you know, you're nervous now because you haven't yet started, but once it starts, you're already in it. And once it ends, it's done. You finished it. And he was like, oh, yeah. And so I just replayed my own words to him, to myself. And it's true. Like, it's the before that gives all the anxiety. But once it starts, you're already in it anyway. And by the end of it, it's already done anyway. So there's like not
Yeah.
much else.
Coming from a professional speaker, it doesn't matter how much experience you have, you still get a little bit of because you have a responsibility and a commitment to the people that are listening to you to be able to touch them. But what you experience there is that our authenticity is found in our stories. And that's why when you bring the true self, then there's nothing to be fearful about because this is not something I'm trying to be intellectual about. This is my journey, my story. And my job is to be able then to ensure that there's a bridge into it. So then you can see yourself in my story. And if I deliver that, then I've delivered.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and that's what you did without even really thinking about it, because, and that's what people relate to, because people don't want the intellectual bit. People want to see your humanity. They want to relate with you as they.
Yeah.
They just want you. They don't want the accuse and all that. They want you and your human experience that I can relate to it. So great, great. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in many spaces. You're amazing. You're amazing. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in many, many spaces. Now, oh my God, we can talk all day. I can see the time there. I just want to, I can't leave this podcast without hanging into when America have a cold, the rest of the world has a flu. Currently, the migration space is crazy. What are your thoughts about it? And how can Australia, in your own opinion, as we enter to the election time, just a few weeks into it, how do we need to think about it differently when we think about migration?
That's a good question. I think there are very many misconceptions about migration, particularly in Australia as well. I mean, the US clearly showing their own situations, but Australia is an aging population, And also, so they need the workforce, they need the skilled labor, but the messaging is in being sent around that. Australia is also a party to the Convention on the Human Rights of people and also to the Refugee Convention. So they have put their hand up that they're willing to take on refugees. This is why refugees end up coming to Australia. But I feel there's a misconception in people saying, "Oh, why are they coming here? What are they doing here?" They're coming because they've been told this is a safe space. And unfortunately, there are people that are also taking advantage of those refugees and people trying to flee unfair spaces because, their lives are at risk. People are putting kids at risks. Like there was that incident that passed about boat people. Um, but I felt quite strongly about that and the terms that were being thrown around. I thought that, as a human and also as a parent, I would not put my kids in a boat that I wasn't sure would arrive somewhere, unless I thought that that was the absolute only last resort because staying they would die anyway. And if people looked at it from that perspective, I think they would more see the desperation that's happening as opposed to people trying to rot the system. There were people in there, of course, taking advantage of the people that were desperate enough and saying, yep, no, we've got pathways for you. We've got this safe way. Like what people don't know is like a lot of the stories that were coming out is people coming on boats a lot of the times weren't even told how they were traveling. Some of them had lost family members along the way. And it's not like everyone's just saying, it's not, it's, it's not something that people just put their hand up and say, yeah, of course I want to go on this dangerous boat ride. There's a level of desperation there. And I feel like if it's looked at in those lenses, there might be a bit more compassion in looking at how we treat some of these people that are coming through. And then secondly, again, cycles back down to if you're going to do something, do it right then. So if Australia is saying that they're willing to accept refugees, then I think it should be done properly. Otherwise, then the messaging should be that they don't want to accept refugees so that people don't think that this is a space to come. And with regards to skilled work, I guess there's also a lot of employers are struggling to find employees and workers within Australia to do specific specialized jobs, or sometimes they're not even specialized. It's just there's certain jobs that are there that need doing that there's not enough of a workforce here. So people aren't actually coming in to steal people's jobs. It's either the jobs that the Australians don't want to do or they are just not finding the right fit locally. There's a lot of labor market testing that needs to be happening, and employers actually go through some hoops to try and get an overseas worker to take a job that that it's not essentially the government is trying to put a system that they're not choosing overseas workers over local Australian labor workforce. So again, if that information was properly understood and known, I feel like there'll be less resentment from people about other people coming into the country to come and work. We've got some. I just attended a session a few weeks ago where the state of New South Wales was talking to businesses and also just the community, I guess, about how they could assist with regards to filling in a skilled workforce. And there were people there that had arrived on state nominated skilled visas that were saying they'd been in the country or had arrived and had not been able to find a job for months, like some going on 7 months. So they've been assessed as having suitable skills. And might I add, if you go through those independent skilled stream visas, you're really jumping through hoops because they're assessing to make sure your qualifications meet Australian standards and that your work experience also matches a specific level. So if you are getting that visa, you've literally jumped through all the hoops you can jump through. And it would be in the interests of an employer, I guess, to be able to use someone who's gone through that process because they've been vetted, essentially, for lack of a better word. But they're finding that because their visa name has the word temporary in it,
Mm.
even though it actually has a pathway to permanent residency very easily and not including an employer, they there's just not enough knowledge or understanding around what different visas mean, when you can hire people for how long. Because even on student visas, you can still hire students to do some jobs,
Mm.
but it's just about the hours and that sort of thing. And I think there needs to be an improvement, and we're working on this. So I've partnered up with the Business Centre Newcastle, and Hunter Business to try and do some education sessions to local small to medium businesses, just to send out the messaging out there about what different visas mean, who can work on what visas, and touch on all aspects, not just employer sponsored options, I mean, them as well, but also other ones.
Yeah.
Um, just to change that language a little bit, because it's really ironic that employers are constantly struggling, with filling these skills shortages, but there are people that are willing and wanting to work that are just not being offered the jobs. It's like, if you could get them all in the one room and just say, here, talk to each other and help each other solve each other's problems, it will be so much easier. But it's an education thing, it's a learning thing, it's the right messaging getting out there. And I feel like it's in all visa streams. So right now, I feel like there's also been a target on international students,
Mm.
which is another issue in itself. Because if you think about it, it's the international student market is actually quite an important market for Australia.
Yeah.
Not only is it bringing in funds from the international students that are paying the school fees to help sustain the universities, but it's also training people who could then potentially grow into being workers within Australia, and you've trained them the way you want to train them so that they can contribute to your workforce after that. It's a good investment. But cutting those numbers, or essentially sending the messaging out there internationally to say Australia doesn't want you as international students, I feel like we'll feel the effects later.
Yeah.
And in the end, rather than being in this space where people still want to come and being able to mold the sort of people you want to bring in the end, there'll be a level of desperation and you start bringing in anyone. And that won't solve the issues. It might bring in some more difficulties. So I feel like you can be quite targeting. I know there's some talks around the fact that the housing shortages and are being affected by regulations or Migration Act. And I'm just like, that it doesn't exist. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, where did you get the clause from? Oh, I was just researching and I found it. I'm like, but where exactly did you look? Did you look at the act? And they said, no, I didn't look at the act. I'm like, so where did you get this information? And they're like, I was just researching and I put it in ChatGPT. And it actually made up a section. So most of it was correct, except the last reference was, it just didn't exist. And that's where the risk is. So it's also about, like, it could look very legit in the first instance, and you could even tick off some things and think, oh yeah, that sounds about right. But really, you need to do your cross checking and all your work. So I wouldn't suggest that you use it for legal arguments or anything like that. But I feel like there's certainly room to use AI for certain things, whether that's like assisting with policies, just rewording, streamlining, things like that that are quite admin intense as well. But you also have to have the human aspect and review that. So there's a training I went to within the legal space, and someone had just said, treat ChatGPT just like one of your law clerks or paralegals. You wouldn't just send off correspondence they've drafted just as it is. You would review it, you would ensure that the information is correct, etc. So it's about that. Like, it's not taking away your job, but it's definitely potentially helping streamline some processes and help you be a lot more efficient with your time. And I think if it's used the right way, there's absolutely lots of benefits. But also, if taken advantage of and used the wrong way without much care, there's very high risks as well involved with that. It could be centering around giving clients wrong advice. They've lost money, they've lost time, and potentially opportunities, particularly when it comes to migration. So, really big consequences. And I think it's just, personally for me, I would not disregard it, but I would absolutely use it with some caution.
Amazing. Now, the final question to a young D who's listening to us, who's at the juncture of the future and is thinking, am I going to be a fashion designer? Am I going to be a lawyer? Am I going to study in Zambia or am I going to study in Australia? What is your advice? Final word.
I think my advice would be, um, it's important to have a plan or to think about things, but it's also important to leave room to read the situation and things that come across and take opportunities as they come. Sometimes you might have a direction you want to go into, and then something pops up, and if it's niggling on you, absolutely look into it. Like my path, I'm generally a planner and I'm organized and stuff, but I always do leave room for, I guess I'm open to redirection depending on what then comes. So I'm not fixed. And I think that that's important because, I don't know, call it fate or whatever else, but I feel like there's an external thing outside that sometimes if you draw on that energy, you do get some direction of where you need to be or where you need to be going, and absolutely push through and cross those boundaries. Like there's nothing you can't do to anyone listening. It's just, it is hard work. It is about nurturing all those relationships. But finishing off, and most important, when you do get wherever you're getting, network. Like that is an important thing that I wish someone told me earlier as well while I was at uni,
Yeah,
is find the opportunity to network, link in with people, volunteer places just so you're getting an understanding of a workspace and in practice how it's going to be. Similar to what you said, Anastasia, in that you study something like law, for example, is often, yeah, misjudged in the sense that people think, yep, I'm going to go in and I'm going to help people. But you go into practice and it's like, yes, you are helping, but it's within these bounds and it's not just what's right is right. So having that exposure will give you that clarity so that you're not getting a shock after you spend 5 years and you're like, yep, now I'm going to the world. And then you realize, oh, but it's not. Whereas you can mold your direction a little bit better once you have that exposure and actually understand in practice how it looks like and how it differs from the theory.
right. Now, to our people who could be your client, talk to us about where they can find you from Rupert Legal and from your fashion section.
Just we kind of slowed that down a little bit. If you Google, you might see some snippets around that. Just life and kids got busy, but I do want to go back into that space. So just keep an eye out. But for now, you can just try and Google Jazam and see what you find. And then for Rupert Legal and Immigration Law, same thing. You can Google Rupert Legal. Our website will come up. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. You can email us at info@rupertlegal.com.au. And for those in Australia, our phone number is 0240211090. And for
Amazing.
anyone in Newcastle, we're based in Redhead, so local.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. That's a good spot to finish. Thank you for coming to Freedom Fire. Do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Anastasia. Thanks for inviting me.